You're tuned in to Beyond the Known. Off the eastern shores of Micronesia lies a silent city, its basalt walls dark against the turquoise sea, its corridors lost to coral and time. Locals whisper of spirits that guard its ruins, of kings who ruled with magic, and of forces that lifted stone heavier than the pyramids. This is Nan Madol, a place once called the Venice of the Pacific, and a mystery that refuses to fade. Thank you for joining us, dear listener. Tonight we journey deep into the Pacific, where myth and memory intertwine. We'll define what makes Nan Madol so extraordinary, explore the stranger theories that surround it, and then, as always, return to the light of grounded understanding to see what science has to say. So let's get started. First, let's dive into the history and definition of this forgotten city.
Nan Madol is, well, it's quite something. It's this vast, ancient city built quite deliberately out on a coral reef right next to Temwin Island, which connects to the bigger island of Pohnpei in Micronesia. It's made up of more than 90 artificial islets. These weren't natural. They were engineered, built up from the reef, and all linked together by this intricate system of canals and tidal channels. Its name, Nan Madol, it actually translates to in the space between things, which perfectly describes it. The water isn't a barrier there. It's what connects everything. It's truly unique in Oceania, maybe only rivaled by Easter Island in terms of massive stone construction.
That setup alone is fascinating. An entire city offshore, built on water, essentially. And when you look at the sheer size and the materials they used, it just becomes mind-boggling.
Exactly. The whole thing is built using these massive columnar basalt logs. It's a type of volcanic rock that naturally forms these long pillar-like shapes when lava cools. So the builders had these ready-made, incredibly heavy beams to work with. They stacked them in this kind of interlocking way, almost like a giant log cabin but with stone. This created the platforms, the walls, tombs, dwellings, all without any kind of mortar or cement holding them together, just gravity and ingenious placement.
Yeah, these aren't small structures. We're talking about walls reaching up to 50 feet high in places and maybe 16 feet thick. That's serious engineering designed to last against the ocean and weather. The royal mortuary area, Nandawas, is apparently larger than a football field, and some of the individual stones involved are just staggering in size.
They really are. To give you a sense of scale, archaeologists estimate that just one cornerstone in the Nandawas walls weighs around 50 tons. Think about that the average block in the Great Pyramid is maybe 2.5 tons. These are 20 times heavier.
50 tons, moved and placed on a remote Pacific reef. So when did all this happen? This wasn't just a small community project. It implies a major power was behind it.
The archaeological evidence points to the initial islet construction starting somewhere between 900 and 1200 CE, but the truly massive building, the megalithic phase with those 50-ton stones, that seems to be later, roughly 1200 to 1600 CE. This was the time of the Sodeler dynasty. Nan Madol was their ceremonial and political center. They ruled Pohnpei and the surrounding area for about 5 centuries, right up until around 1700 CE.
So this massive construction project was a direct expression of the Sodelers' power. You need incredible organization and control to mobilize the labor for something like this.
Absolutely. Building Nan Madol would have required an enormous workforce, likely compelled through tribute or a kind of forced labor system across Pohnpei. The Sodelers must have had an incredibly effective, probably quite brutal system to command that level of manpower over generations. The city itself demonstrates that centralized authority. It was deliberately divided, Madol Pa was the administrative hub, while Madol Pa was the religious and mortuary sector, with priests housed on its 58 islets.
But even with absolute power and endless labor, there's still the core mystery. The basalt, these huge columns, they weren't quarried nearby, were they?
No, that's the crux of the logistical puzzle. The quarry is at a place called Socas on the complete opposite side of Pohnpei Island. That means they had to transport this material over 25 miles across open water and tricky reefs to the construction site.
25 miles, with stones weighing up to 50 tons. And they didn't have metal tools capable of easily cutting or lifting this stuff, nor did they have the wheel. How on earth did they manage it?
That's the question modern archaeology struggles to answer definitively with conventional explanations. We just don't have a clear, proven method for how they could have floated, maneuvered, and then stacked stones of that size with the technology they had. The sheer difficulty is almost impossible to comprehend.
And that's where the local Pohnpeian oral traditions become so important, isn't it? because they do have an explanation.
They do indeed. The local legends don't talk about ropes and ramps and brute force. They say the stones weren't moved by ordinary people at all. The stories claim that sorcerers, powerful beings who came from elsewhere, used magic, perhaps chance or some kind of energy to make the stones fly or float into place. It's a completely supernatural explanation for a seemingly impossible feat of engineering.
So you have this sophisticated city, built in isolation on a reef, requiring immense resources and labor, and featuring construction that defies easy explanation. The local legends fill that gap with magic, reinforcing the deep mystery of how Nan Madol was truly built. Now that we've seen what makes Nan Madol so remarkable, let's step deeper into the shadows where ancient myths and extraordinary theories offer their explanations.
Well, the primary legend, the one you always hear, involves twin sorcerer brothers, Olisipa and Olosopa. The oral traditions say they arrived on Pohnpei, mysteriously from the sky, and possessed incredible powers. It was supposedly these two who founded Nan Madol. They used their magic to summon the huge basalt columns, making them fly through the air or glide over the water into position. This is the foundational myth explaining the impossible construction.
Arriving from the sky, using powers to move stone. You can see how modern alternate theorists might interpret that. Not necessarily as literal magic, but perhaps as a memory of advanced technology. Some speculate that the chance or powers could be, a description of something like sound levitation or an energy source we don't understand, used to manipulate gravity. It provides a potential answer, though a very speculative one, to that core engineering puzzle.
And that line of thinking quickly expands outwards. Nan Madol often gets connected to these grander theories, particularly the idea of a lost continent in the Pacific Mu, or sometimes Lemuria. The suggestion here is that Nan Madol isn't just an isolated marvel. It might be a surviving remnant, maybe a mountaintop complex from a much older, advanced civilization that was lost when this continent sank beneath the waves, possibly in some great cataclysm.
Right, the Mu theory. It posits this vast Pacific landmass as the cradle of humanity maybe 12,000 years ago or even earlier, with technology far beyond its time. Then catastrophic volcanic activity or floods supposedly submerged it.
And proponents of this idea point to other megalithic sites across the Pacific as supporting evidence. They look at the statues on Easter Island or the massive stone archway, the Hamanga a Maui, on Tonga Tabu, and other ruins. The argument is that these aren't unrelated island cultures stumbling upon similar ideas. Instead, they're seen as the surviving peaks, the fragmented evidence of this single, widespread, advanced civilization, Mu, whose full extent now lies underwater.
So Nan Madol becomes part of a potential global network of ancient, highly advanced sites, all possibly linked by shared knowledge or technology from this lost civilization. It connects the dots between these impossible structures found thousands of miles apart.
Exactly. Theorists draw parallels between the precision needed at Nan Madol and, say, the intricate stonework found in the Mayan ruins in Yucatan or sites in South America. Some even point to inscriptions, like those supposedly at Uxmal mentioning the lands of the West, as potential references back to this sunken Pacific homeland.
The implication being that the builders of Nan Madol, maybe the Sodlurs inherited fragments of this knowledge, weren't just using brute force. They might have had access to some kind of advanced engineering, perhaps an energy technology, that history has largely forgotten.
And this speculation sometimes gets even more specific, extending to claims about the site itself. You occasionally hear reports, though often lacking rigorous scientific backing, of strange magnetic or electromagnetic anomalies detected in or around the ruins of Nan Madol.
Which leads to ideas that the city wasn't just built using advanced means, but maybe it was an advanced functional site itself, like some kind of energy grid or power center harnessing these forces.
Precisely. Some theories push this further, suggesting Nan Madol could have been a ceremonial energy node, or perhaps, in the more extreme versions, even an ancient landing site or base for non-human visitors who provided the original technology. The sheer difficulty of construction is presented as evidence for something beyond conventional human means.
At first, it might seem like the only explanation is something extraordinary. But this is beyond the known, and this is the part where we step back and let science and grounded reason offer their side of the story.
Right. And science starts with the most basic element, the stone itself. That columnar basalt is key. Geologically, we know that as certain types of lava cool slowly, they contract and fracture into these long, often hexagonal columns. So nature actually provided the builders with pre-shaped, long, sturdy building blocks. This means for many of the smaller pieces, it wasn't complex quarrying. It was more like harvesting or collecting these natural logs.
Okay, that explains the shape and maybe makes handling the smaller ones more feasible, but it doesn't fully solve the problem of the truly massive ones, does it? That 50-ton cornerstone still had to be quarried somehow and transported 25 miles from Sokas.
No, it doesn't solve the big problem entirely, but it helps frame it. Archaeological work confirms the Sokas quarry as the source. The most accepted scientific hypothesis for transport involves, well, large wooden rafts or possibly heavy-duty dugout canoes, known locally as dew. The idea is they could have floated these massive stones using the buoyancy of large timbers, maybe lashed together or without riggers for stability, to carefully navigate them across the reef system to the building site. It would have required incredible skill and coordination.
Loading a 50-ton log onto a raft, keeping it stable for 25 miles, then getting it off the raft and onto a partially built structure in the water. That still sounds incredibly difficult. And then how do you lift it into place, potentially 50 feet up?
That's the second major challenge, the construction itself. The thinking is they likely used ramps, perhaps built of earth, timber, or coral rubble, combined with levers, rollers, and sheer, coordinated human muscle power. Lots of people pulling on ropes in perfect unison. They wouldn't have used mortar, so the stability came from the immense weight of the stones and the interlocking log cabin-style stacking. They'd build up the outer walls and fill the interior cavity with coral rubble to create the platforms. It was painstaking, incremental work relying purely on physics and manpower.
So this wasn't necessarily magic or lost technology, but rather an incredible mastery of basic engineering principles and resource management pushed to an extreme scale, maybe skills developed over time.
That seems plausible. Researchers point out that the Pohnpeian culture already had experience building large structures on the reef, namely elaborate coastal fish weirs or traps. These required manipulating stone and understanding water flow and stability in that marine environment. So the techniques used for Nan Madol might have been an evolution, a scaling up of existing indigenous knowledge about working with stone and water rather than something entirely alien or suddenly introduced. An adaptation of known skills to a monumental task.
It's important then, when looking at these ancient mysteries, to be cautious about jumping to extraordinary conclusions, even when faced with something so impressive. Comparing it to other sites needs care too.
Yes. For example, you sometimes hear theories about sites like Pumapunku in South America, possibly involving artificial stone, like geopolymers. But for Nan Madol, the scientific analysis is clear. The stone is natural basalt. It's easy for non-specialists to sometimes misinterpret evidence or dating when looking for proof of something exotic. Archaeology emphasizes that while the how remains debated and deeply impressive, it's likely grounded in human ingenuity and immense, sustained labor, utilizing the available natural resources.
So the mystery isn't really what the stones are, but the sheer human willpower and organizational genius required to manipulate natural basalt on such a colossal scale, using only the tools available at the time.
Exactly. And the basalt itself was well-suited. Pohnpei's volcanic rock is very dense and strong, partly due to high levels of metallic oxides like olivine and magnetite. This makes it durable and resistant to weathering, ideal for this kind of gravity-based construction in a harsh marine setting.
But this incredible monument, built with such effort to last for ages, is now facing serious threats. The focus has shifted from how it was built to whether it will survive.
It's in a precarious state, unfortunately. Archaeological surveys show active deterioration. The roots of invasive plants are literally prying the stones apart. And erosion from wind and waves, especially with rising sea levels due to climate change, is undermining the foundations built on the reef flat.
And it's not just nature. Human activity is also causing damage.
Yes, sadly. There's evidence of unauthorized digging, likely looking for artifacts, especially in burial areas. Stones have been removed or broken by visitors, and there are signs of fires being lit against the ancient walls. All of this accelerates the decay.
Protecting a site like this requires coordinated effort and funding. Is that happening?
That's been a major stumbling block. There's a long-standing and complex ownership dispute. It's between the Pohnpei state government and the traditional leadership of the Madolanim municipality, the Namwarki, who claim historical sovereignty over the site.
How does an ownership dispute actually prevent conservation work?
It creates paralysis. Without clear, undisputed authority, it's incredibly difficult to secure and manage the kind of major international funding needed for large-scale stabilization and preservation work. Crucially, this dispute has repeatedly hindered efforts to get Nan Madol listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And without that UNESCO designation, access to vital grants, technical expertise, and the framework for long-term protection remains largely out of reach. So the site remains vulnerable while the arguments continue.
The story of Nan Madol really encapsulates this challenge we often face, trying to separate compelling myths from the, frankly, almost equally unbelievable achievements of actual human history. Magic or not, the sheer scale of effort and the power of the Sodler dynasty that Nan Madol represents is undeniable.
And now we're left with this dual puzzle. Not just the lingering questions about its incredible creation, but the very immediate, urgent crisis of its survival. It's ironic, isn't it? A structure engineered to withstand the ocean for centuries is now incredibly fragile. The basalt is strong, yes, but its stability relies on the coral fill and the precise placement on the reef, a system highly vulnerable to climate change impacts and, well, human interference and neglect. Perhaps the most profound question remaining about Nan Madol isn't who built it, or even exactly how. It might be this. In our modern world, can we overcome our own disputes and finally agree on who is responsible for preventing this unique piece of human heritage from crumbling back into the sea?
That's it for this journey beyond the known. If the unknown calls to you, do not forget to like, subscribe, and follow. There is so much more waiting to be discovered. And if you really want to help us out, consider becoming a member. With Secret Passage, you will unlock early access to our episodes, our audiobook library, Audiobook Underground, and a rotating list of curated wonders, other videos we recommend for curious minds. For those who want it all, Vault Access gives you everything, plus a board seat where you can request topics for us to explore in future episodes. Your support keeps the adventure alive.